that? All these lights are gonna expose my shitty skin.
No, it looks good. I was actually just thinking
you're gonna have to buff my head or something.
The light is looking good on your face right now. Like you look tanned.
Good.
I could adjust the temperature of the light to make us look a little better. Again, really no formal protocol here. Basically, we just chat about whatever we want to chat about. There's obviously some things we would want to pick your brain on today, right? Like you've started new business, Tilly's Dog Treats.
Yeah.
I'll let you give the full explanation. I know the idea is just simpler ingredients, good healthy eating for our dogs, and we've been going back and forth on this whether or not I should be eating the treats because they seem healthier than a lot of snacks.
We should try. One of these days we should try.
Yeah, I was checking this out and I was just like, crude protein, like is that going to be the next big trend? Is like people just eating crude proteins, crude fats, and crude fibers. Like it sounds super hardcore.
It actually sounds like the pet version of the carnivore diet.
Yeah, like it really does. Like if you're looking to bulk up and get some crude protein in your life, then get Tilly's for you as a human. But great treats for the dogs. We've actually given it to my girlfriend's or fiance's cat, and he seems to be liking it. Yeah. Obviously, you have to break it up into really small chunks. And I was like, maybe we need to like stick it in a blender and just like kind of get like a little powder.
Maybe just
going.
a little, or even a little water. I wonder. Just soften it up.
I tried to go full chunk with water, and it didn't resonate the same way. Okay. I don't know. We're gonna keep experimenting because then it's like maybe we branch off of Tilly's and make Preston's the cat version of Tilly's, right?
Yeah.
Those cat lovers are just as crazy as
and just have it be the same treat.
Yeah, same treat,
different bag,
smaller chunks, right? Like
different
just little bite-sized pieces.
That's hilarious.
So. Do you like to be called Jacob or Jakub?
Jacob.
Because like you got the unique way of spelling Jacob, and every time I see it, I'm like thinking Jakub.
That's what my parents call me.
Is that what they call you? Like where's your background from?
Czech.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we have that in common. My grandpa was on that side of the fence. Yeah.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah, this is the beauty of the podcast, right? We're just sharing and caring and learning. Yeah, he left the Czech Republic towards the end of World War II or whenever the kind of like invasion of the Czech Republic happened.
Yeah.
Because I know they actually did a pretty good job defending themselves, is what I reckon.
Yeah.
And then he was involved with the Olympic ski team of the Czech Republic. He was like the biathlon. That's the guy who cross country skis and shoots.
Yeah.
He did that and the ski jumping, like the 300 meter or what, I don't know, 180 meters of flying through the air like a squirrel.
Oh, they go down and then they just like.
Yeah, that was him.
That's nuts.
And they ended up that's my mom's dad.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
He was there, and then they ended up like the lore in the family is that they smuggled jewels out in their skis, and that was kind of how they got out of there because the government, they had a pretty good family business actually making suits. So when I was a younger lad and I started a denim company, that was kind of one of the motivations behind that in my life. Is like, oh, like this is in my family. Like my grandparents made suits in the Czech Republic. Like I should be able to figure this business out, which then I realized I hated it. Yeah. It was a nightmare. But the other cool thing about the Czech, and you'd probably really appreciate this, is like we have like one of the original translations of the Czech Bible. We had this guy come by my parents' house the other day, and I was there, and he was looking at their like water pump or something, and I don't know how it got up, but like some sort of religious conversation broke down. We ended up busting this out, and this Bible is from either like the mid 1500s or like early 1600s. It's like an ancient relic of like But the crazy thing is like the words are all there. And I used ChatGPT to translate a page, and it was crazy. Like, I don't know. We don't need to go too deep down that road, but that's kind of my history with the Czech. I forget.
I had no idea.
Yeah, where exactly they were from? Liberec? Maybe was the
Liberec.
Oh, that's the proper pronunciation. My grandpa. It's funny because like Jakub, he always used to call me Tomas. Tomas, come here, and you'd be smoking cigarettes and drinking vodkas in the garage, and he was a wild character. But Czech people are very interesting. Like, nice to see, nice to know another brother in arms.
There's not a ton here.
Yeah, like a lot of Ukrainians and
A lot of Ukrainians, a lot of Polish people.
Yeah.
Yeah, just not a ton of Czechs. Not a huge community. I know we first immigrated here 1990.
So were you born in Czech?
I was born there.
What?
Yeah,
Like,
so we left in 88,
huh.
and it was still communist.
Interesting.
So across the border we go with 8 suitcases, say we're going on a vacation, which we clearly weren't.
Wow, you're like my grandpa.
Across the border, you know, like knocking on someone's door at midnight,
Crazy.
trying to get, they eventually came out because they were worried someone was coming looking for them. They eventually came out,
Yeah.
let us in, and next day took us to a refugee camp. And we lived there not very long, but lived in Austria for 14 months.
What?
My parents worked, my dad worked at a horse ranch, Pez factory. My mom worked at a...
Like the Pez dispensers?
Yeah.
Get out of
My
here.
dad, my mom worked at a hotel. We lived in the back of this hotel, and yeah, eventually made our way to Canada.
Yeah, how did you end up in Edmonton is where you came?
Yeah, we actually
Like,
came to Edmonton.
Edmonton.
Yeah. So we came to Edmonton. My mom had an uncle here.
Yeah.
He came in the 60s and worked for CN, I think, CN Rail. And yeah, and eventually he passed only a couple of years later, so we moved to Vancouver. Bigger Czech community there, right? If you want to live, if you think you're coming over from anywhere in the world, Edmonton or Vancouver.
A lot of people choose Vancouver.
Love Edmonton
And then
now,
they realize, like, okay, Vancouver, like, I don't know
It's
if this
expensive.
is sustainable for me financially.
That's exactly where we got to.
So we go to Edmonton.
4 years later, we ended up in Red Deer. We had friends there, and they just said, why don't you move here and buy a house for $100 grand?
Yeah.
But in Vancouver, we lived in a townhouse complex that we rented, and they bulldozed the forest behind us and built, like, I don't know if they were quite $1 million homes, but pretty close back in the mid-90s. And so as, you know, mom worked at a restaurant and then did aesthetics. My dad did construction during the day, pizzas at night, and on Sundays we delivered flyers. And it was like, we're never going to make a go of this.
Yeah. And now look at you.
So now, and then here we are, and back at Edmonton.
Interesting.
So kind of come full circle.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because yesterday I went out for lunch with one of my buddies whose family is from Thailand, and he's first generation Canadian. And it's interesting with all this immigration talk, right?
Yeah.
And I think these conversations like show the other side of like what we don't want to get away from, right? Where like your family, Czech Republic, want out, come to Canada, and like obviously the journey takes you, and then now you're kind of like the example of what you'd want from immigration, right? Like a guy that's working in the bank, doing good things, starting businesses, right? Like being a very positive contribution to society. Where I think right now it's like the immigration issue in Canada is kind of like it's gone to shit a little bit. Like, and this is where it's like people need the opportunity to change their life and like contribute, and if you're going to be a part of it, cool. But I think what's kind of happened is like there's a scam going on around the world of like we're open to letting people in, and as long as you're willing to become a student, like come on down, and like it doesn't matter if you're going to the University of Alberta or you're somehow signing up for some online college that like you can get that money and do it. And I've been trying to put these pieces together, and it's like I've had some people that went to India and they like see all these billboards like, hey, like you want to go to Canada, it's super easy, right? Pick up the phone, call the number, and they're like, yeah, cool, it's going to cost $93,000. You're going to pay me, and then I'm going to get you into the school. And it's kind of this big scheme of like, what is really happening here? Like, is this a way for like, obviously international students, universities, they get paid more. So who's all coming? What's happening? But like, just because it may not be the best right now doesn't mean like we should like you don't want to see it go to the point where it's like stopped.
No
and,
immigration,
like, no immigration, because it's like then we don't have stories like your family or V-Bud, who's like general manager of the Links of Spruce Grove, and like is really doing what everyone wants from the dream of going to a new country.
That's why you leave.
And it's like we want, like as Canada, it's like diversity, inclusion, like they're nice words, but like different perspectives
that's exactly
bring different results, right? Like just
we get better.
You see, okay, in our culture, this is how we approach these problems, right? And you're like, oh, okay, like we've been very tunnel vision focused on how we do things. At the moment you get that new perspective into the conversation, it's like, oh, maybe this is better for all. I think I was reading this thing while I was taking a user experience course from Google, and it's like curb cuts on intersections on the sidewalk. It's like these are these things that were created for like people in wheelchairs or blind people, but the benefits ripple out so much further to like your FedEx guy that's got a dolly walking around the street, right? It's like he's not necessarily having challenges physically, but he's like got a lot going on, and it's kind of like subtitles on TV where okay, you create this thing for someone
for one demographic,
but now I think I've actually learned how to write better because I watch all these subtitles, and you're like starting to see how people use punctuation properly, and you're like, oh, okay, like, oh, that's how they spell that word, right? So maybe for someone who is a little more hearing impaired, it's like that's why it was created, but the ripple effects go far beyond that, and I feel like that's where you need immigration, is to like start bringing in these new perspectives of people that are like, okay, like in my culture, like this is how we process and do these things, or this is how we emotionally deal with like feedback or criticism, right? Or how we deal with our neighbor or our coworker. There's just so many different things where like at the end of the day, all of us are immigrants here, mostly, except for our First Nations people that like kind of got a bad end of the stick on that side of things. But
I mean, I think it takes a long time, right? Like if you like the change takes a long time. So even if you get immigrants today, it won't change overnight. Like we look at when we were in Austria, I've recently asked my parents, I said, why didn't, like when we were in Austria, the wall fell. Why didn't you just go back? And they said, well, because it's not going to change overnight. Like sure, communism ended today. Next
but you
day
still have people hanging on for like
and the government's in shambles, and there's, I mean, even, you know, all sorts of scams, people buying real estate left, right, and center, trying to get ahead because the government doesn't know what it's doing. But it would probably take a decade.
Totally.
Right? So that's why they didn't go back, which is interesting to me. I thought, well, like, why don't we just go back? Things would be all hunky-dory, so to speak. But it's not like that. And it's the same here. When people immigrate here, if you get an influx of immigration, you're looking for diversity, for change, differences of thought. It's not, you know, a million people don't come today, and tomorrow we've got a different culture. It takes time. It takes time for them to get their feet wet, to figure out where they're living, how to pay bills, how to buy groceries, and
just how our system works, right?
How
like
healthcare works, everything.
You go buy a car for zero down, like, I don't know.
For
I just
9 years.
I keep laughing because I see all these brand new Hyundai Elantras rolling around in my neighborhood from these people that I'm like, I don't know if you like, either you have a ton of money and you're just coming over here and like balling out of control, or like you went into a car dealership and they said you could buy a car with zero down and like finance it over 9 years. Which one of the things I would like to get into today with you, and it doesn't have to be right now because you might want a few minutes to think about it, but obviously you're in finance, banking, and like you understand that side of the world. So maybe like some tips at some point here, like what's something someone should know about banking, financing, getting their personal stuff or business stuff in order, right? Whether it's, I know a lot of people, startups, growing business, like you dealt with equipment financing for a long time. I don't know if you're still doing that or where you've kind of transitioned, but maybe how that, give a little light on that side of life to people on like, hey, like, okay, Goat Track is one of my businesses that I'm involved with, and like we've been growing, and it's like always you need more money to fuel it. There's two ways to do it. Obviously one kind of affects the other, that like banks want to see like you got some capital and some assets, but
that's right.
The other is you grind it out and start with $1, turn it into two to three. We kind of would like to know where financing makes sense, I guess, from your perspective in businesses. Like at what point do you say, hey, like I should really be actively pursuing some sort of line of credit to help me, or scaling up with the equipment purchases, or anything to do with finance, because you're my finance guru.
Sounds good.
I guess Tell me about Tilly's.
Yeah.
I know about it, but tell the world.
Yeah, Tilly's named after my dog, my 10-and-a-half-year-old shepherd. She's a rescue I got 7 years ago. So she's 10 and a half now. She was rescued by Scars when she was 3. So she, I don't know the direct translation, but that's roughly 20 in human years. And she was in an abusive household, and they were abusing each other, supposedly not her. Not that that's any better or worse, and so they took her and her puppies and brought her to this lady's house, and she lived there for 6 months. Like, she wasn't adopted for 6 months, which is, I think, a fairly long time in that world, from what I understand. So I came across her, and yeah, it was just kind of best friends ever since. But for me, it was about creating something local. We're always talking support local, but for me, it was there wasn't a ton of local stuff that was single ingredient. And I mean, obviously, there's a single ingredient on the market.
I think it's very interesting. Just going to local,
Yeah.
right now, we're at a very interesting time where local is Canadian. Right?
That's right.
With what our tariffs and our friends down in America
Yeah,
are doing,
yeah.
which really rattles me right now, because last Sunday that was when tariffs were taking place, right?
Yeah.
And then you wake up Monday morning, the
Yeah.
stock market's tanking, and all of a sudden, we've all done what we needed to do to delay this tariff
for 30 days.
For 30 days,
Yeah.
when, it's like, oh, they put the troops on the border, and I'm like, dude, Alberta had already sent all of our troops to the border in mid-January. Like, we were
Right.
preemptively doing this.
Yeah.
So, like, what is actually going on here, and like, how do you predict where this is all going to go? Because like, the crystal ball is out. Like, there is no prediction now, because it was like Sunday. I'm like, dude, I think we're in for a world of hurt.
Yeah.
For the next 6 months to a year, like, I don't even know, right? But then it's crazy how just Monday you wake up and it's like, wait, that's all a bunch of baloney. It's not going to happen right now.
Yeah, for now.
And I feel like it puts a major focus on Canada that's like vulnerabilities, right? Like, it's kind of the problem of, like, say, you have a rich friend who pays for they do a lot of good things for you. Not to say like Canadians don't have our own culture and independence, but I feel like I'm a Canadian and American in my entire life. Like, a lot of the conversation was like, oh, we don't need to be war, whatever, like, not interested because we got America, right? Like, it was
Big
always
brother,
default. And now I think we find ourselves in a situation where we're like reaping what we sowed in that department of like, okay, now we are kind of like a turtle without its shell, right? Like, we're defenseless, and like, they know that piece of it. But I think we're also underestimated in our like desire to be autonomous in our own world, where like,
well, I think it's forcing us to look internally.
Totally.
Right? Like, we look at all these resources we have, the people we have. I mean, there's no reason we shouldn't be very well off.
Very well. Like,
we should be in the top 1%. I mean, arguably, if you look at the rest of the world, you look at Africa, you look at other parts of the world, we're definitely in the top anyway, but it could actually be so much better.
Totally.
Like way better.
You have a small club with a mega amount of resources.
Right.
It's just, how do we go develop that stuff, I guess?
I think we have to get out of our own way.
Totally.
Like the red tape, the everything. Like, you look at, I mean, we recently, I work at ATV, as you know, our chief economist, Mark Parsons, was talking at a presentation he gave for the Leduc Chamber. And I mean, he said if Keystone gets reignited, and even like if we got Northern Gateway as well, like this, we'd be on fire, and in a good way.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's get rid of the red tape.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't do it responsibly. We don't consider all parties. We do it in a way that, is environmentally friendly, but like, let's do it.
Yeah. Like, we have to, otherwise it's like, it's just going to happen around us and without us. And maybe that's the best thing, is like holding your cards until the time is right to play them, right? Where like,
as long as we play them.
Yeah, we need to play them for sure.
It's like there's an old quote. I think I want to say he was a British author or something. I want to say G.K. Chesterton. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
And it was like, he put out a publication or something, and he asked, a newspaper I think asked, what's wrong with the world? And everyone's blaming this and blaming that, and this guy wrote back, and he's like, I am.
I am wrong with the world.
And he was, it was just like, if there's something wrong, just if we take the onus, right? I might go to work and I might feel that somebody wronged me or something happened. But if you just look internally, it's almost like the extreme ownership concept.
Yeah.
Just take ownership of it, even if it's not your problem.
Right.
I think we're kind of in that same, Canada's sort of in that same situation.
Yeah, like,
right? Like,
we haven't taken extreme ownership.
Right.
And now we're at the gates realizing, oh, that's where that road leads.
Yeah.
Don't like that, right? Don't like being
Right.
bullied by someone that and
now
the
we're
entire
exposed.
country
Now we're really exposed, I think.
kind of just looks at us like, you're not taking us seriously as like a country that literally is like built on different principles. Like, you want to call us 151st state when it's
Right.
like the difference between BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes is so vastly different that it's like, that's almost offensive to be
Right.
like, oh yeah, you guys are all just one, right? It's like, no, like, you'd have to add at least 10 new states if you wanted to explore this, because like, we all are different. Like,
Yeah.
we all have our own things. Like,
That's right.
We're not just clustered into one, which I think is a bit of a misstep on the US's behalf, right? Like, sure, the US has been what it's been, and I'm American, so like, I do love America, but I'm also Canadian, and a proud Canadian at that. And it's, yeah, like electric cars, like this Tesla thing, and it's like China has their own electric car, the BYD, builds your dreams, right? That's like I was talking to V about this yesterday.
Yeah.
$10,000 gets you in an electric vehicle. Right now, we're charging 100% tariffs on these vehicles to come into
Right.
Canada. That,
Yeah.
like, at a certain point here, do you say, hey, actually, no, like, we're not going to do that because this relationship is actually hurting us. So why don't we drop the tariff, or at least make it reasonable, and then you're never going to see a Tesla on the road again when you have these cars that are like Lamborghinis that are fractions of the price because they're just being pumped out of China, right?
Yeah.
But then the ripple effect of that is like ByteDance and all this TikTok stuff.
Yeah,
Like, what's
yeah.
up with this software working its way over here? So then
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
worried about some sort of invasion to stop that. Like, I don't know.
Well, and I think it should, like, I heard a thing on the, and I mean, admittedly, it was a Trump thing, but he was talking about, we welcome all these things from China. But like, do you see any, and I don't know the answer to this, so just don't quote me on this, but like, do you see any Chevrolets in China? Like, do the American stuff go there?
Yeah, not
and
as
vice
much.
and vice versa. I think it's great if we have some of that stuff, but let's
Let's
we open
get some
up
of ours over
some of our stuff over there? But I think the challenge you run into is the reason all this stuff comes from China. If you've ever dealt with anybody that manufactures anything over there, it's so cheap and so fast. I mean, I've heard of stories of clients sending stuff over and saying, hey, I need you to rejig this design. I need you to tweak this. The next day it's done, revision's done. Meanwhile, here we are, not everybody, of course, but as a whole, North America,
Totally.
it takes forever.
Yeah.
Why are they doing it so much quicker?
Yeah.
So I think there's two sides to that.
That is a very interesting one, that the time it takes to get things done, where like, I do think this is a challenge with Canada. It's like psychology as a whole is just like, because it's become a lot more government backed, right? Like everyone's somehow suckling the teat of the government.
Yeah.
And like the expectations of people's performance, I guess, in that environment, because it's like, hey, like a lot of people get into it for the security and all these, like they're not going in there to be like, I'm a high performer, like let me crush it.
That's
and
right.
do that. Like there are some people obviously that do that within it, but they're like very select positions, I think, within that institution where it's kind of just built on mediocrity a little bit. Like, let's
Very
not
much.
ruffle any way too far which way.
Well,
right?
no, but
Like,
it creates a culture.
Yeah.
Like if you go deal with anything, go to the passport office. They're great to deal with,
yeah,
but it moves at a snail's pace.
yeah, and it's interesting from my perspective, and like probably even your perspective, growing up in a family who immigrated here and did all those. Like, we grew up in a family business where like there is no like, oh yeah, like 6 hours is cool today. Like, I'm gonna get a couple things done, and like, so what? Like, some of this stuff won't be done until next month, but that's okay. It's like, no, like in the world of entrepreneurship and building a business, like time is money, right? Like, let's figure out how to get this done faster, more efficient, and better, because I need to move on to the next thing rather than like, I'm just gonna live here. And that sounds super attractive to like, in a way, to me, right? Like, having spent the last 15 years of my life like in the trenches, just like negotiating the shit out of everything in life to try and like get where I need to go and deliver the results. Cause it's like the moment when you're a contractor and you're working for people and it's like, you don't hit the result immediate. Like there's a lot of times where, okay, I'm going to end this contract, right?
Yeah.
So you're constantly motivated to deliver the goods and faster, better, more efficient than, okay, I can drag this out for 8 months, right? And like kind of drag my feet. I'll do a little of this while I'm doing some TikToks and like, it sounds like a nice balance, but like I'd rather just be able to find my balance in the fact that like something's going on with my girlfriend's family or fiance's family and I can say, hey, okay, for this 3 hours, like I'm not working, right? Like whatever time of day it is for the most part. Sometimes it's a little crazy, but it's like those big things that come up in life. I'm like, I'd rather do that and then I'll work on Saturdays and do all these other things.
But you have the choice.
Exactly, which is, I don't know. Anyway, back to local. Try and find you back to your train of thought of like I guess
like it's local and it's single ingredient, and then I think a big chunk of it is like I love my dog more than you know,
we were talking about
things,
that earlier,
right? Like it's part of it is something that's based on her. Part of it's creating a logo that I won't dare say iconic by any means, but I think it stands out. I think the matte packaging catches your eye. The back actually just has a story that I wrote from her perspective of how life started out a bit more challenging for her, and then how I adopted her, and now we just basically spend our summers sitting under trees, sun tanning, and in the winter we're going for car rides.
I like that.
So I think part of it is simplicity and ingredient. There's just one ingredient, beef long. It's baked at low temp. There's nothing added to it. Made in Canada, made from Canadian beef. And then part of it is just marketing. I think it just looks better.
It's a classy package.
Yeah, I think it looks good, and I think it stands out on the shelf. And I think when people buy, they buy obviously with their emotions.
Right.
For certain things.
You buy with emotion, rationalize with facts. That's it. You know?
So you see that. You see a story from a dog that was rescued and now lives its best life, riding around in the back of my car on a bed in a hammock.
So I guess obviously it's new, this whole adventure.
Yeah.
And if someone were to want to like try some of these awesome Canadian products for their dogs, like how would they find you? Would email at this stage?
So right now it's just so new. I mean, we've been selling. I'm the assistant delivery driver, as I call myself, jokingly, and Tilly rides in the back. So I've been delivering it myself. But it's on Instagram, so at the Tilly Collection. Feel free to message us there.
That's probably the easiest way to
That's
get
probably
going.
the easiest way, yeah. And then I'm happy to, within Edmonton or surrounding area, I'm happy to deliver it.
Yeah, as long as maybe not in the U.S. right now. Well, maybe right now is the best time before these tariffs come.
But yeah, we're not subject to any tariffs, as you know. So so that's that.
One thing I would like to let people know, because you do have this story here. I'd like to tell them about the book that you wrote, because I think that was very interesting, that you are a bit of an author and a storyteller. And I think right now a lot of people are writing books, but you wrote your book before ChatGPT existed, and I thought it was a very interesting book, to be honest with you. It's like, maybe just take me through, I forget the title of it, but walk me through the concept of it again, and let's have a conversation about that, because I did find it actually fascinating.
Yeah, and maybe thanks for the reminder. Maybe I'll publish it one day, but I spent a couple of years writing this thing. And it's meant for a kid's book. And it started out because as immigrants, my parents, namely my mom, would just hammer me on finances. And it was stuff that I didn't realize until years later that mattered. And I realized that no one got the same education. So growing up, my mom took half my paycheck. Just took half of it. You're making $200, $100 goes away. And saving for college and stuff like that, which is what they did with the money. And then I'd get the bank statement, and she'd make me keep my receipts. And I would, of course, have, as a teenager, if I was lucky to have half of them. The statement would come, where's your receipts? And I'd bring 3 receipts, and there's 40 items on the list on the bank statement, and make me check them off. Does this match? Did you actually spend this money?
Just reconciling your bank
I was doing
statements?
bank recs at 14.
Wow.
And so I thought it was so annoying at the time. And it wasn't until later that I realized the value. But anyway, so as I grew up, I realized that not everyone had the same education. I remember living with friends or meeting friends, and they were talking about credit and stuff, and they weren't paying these bills and this and that. And I thought, shouldn't you pay that bill? Like, it's going to affect your credit. And I thought, shit, maybe not everybody got the same education I did. So I wrote this kids book, and it's meant for kids probably in, I would say, the 10 to 12 age category. And it's called Perry, the Penny Pinching Pig, and the Adventures of the Sand Grifters. A little long, it needs some work. But essentially it's these two brothers, an older brother who sells his business in California. It's based in Lake Tahoe. I listened to a podcast at the time, and they were in Lake Tahoe. It sounded really cool. So they're based in Lake Tahoe, and they stumble across a pig that's the size of an elephant. His name is Perry. And he's being chased by these sand grifters, and there's this. Anyway, throughout the book, it teaches financial literacy. And so my thought was, I wanted to write a book, but I didn't want to write a book that was, Jacob and Tom go to the store.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with this, but Jacob and Tom go to the store and they buy one apple. Like the book centers around financial literacy. It's
less
just
story, more like here's a math problem. Like, let's just dollars and cents it versus like, what's the emotional journey to get you there?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a kid's story, a kid's action story.
Yeah.
And that incorporates financial literacy. So Perry, this large pig, learns financial literacy lessons throughout the book. So at the end of every chapter, and most chapters I should say, there's something called Perry's 2 cents.
Right.
Which I can't take credit for, a friend came up with. And essentially he's got like financial lessons that are summed up at the end of the chapter. And they're super basic, right? You talk about, when you get a paycheck, it goes here, and it's just very basic things. It's nothing like, it's nothing earth-shattering, but it talks about things like saving money, credit.
But I think the simple things are the most important things, right? It's like when you start getting into the complicated stuff is usually when things go sideways, right?
Yeah.
When you're like, oh, now I'm into options trading or derivatives and like all these like collateralized debt obligations. Like, it's like the simple fundamentals of like, what's our crude protein, our crude fats, and crude fibers of finance, and like that's savings, expenses, and revenue, right? Like those are kind of the pillars of it. And if you can understand that, which you're right, like it's the education around this is crazy, and how we don't emphasize it more in life, and instead it's like, hey, go learn calculus, right? It's like, cool. If I want to calculate the speed of a traveling ball, and it's, I'm going to go find someone that's actually really passionate about that. But what I should understand is like, how much money should you spend on your credit card before it starts to negatively impact your credit rating? Or what does debt actually do for you in a good way or bad way, right? Because what are the scary things of like refinancing your house, or like taking out a second mortgage, all these crazy things that people get themselves into versus like, trying to build that foundation where you're like, I'm not just living in debt. Like, I think that's one of these things that it's scary. Like, I'm not a big debt guy, but like you see these rich people that are like, actually like debt is the only way to do it because like I'm not paying income tax.
You get that leverage, right? Yeah.
And like, the benefit of like, oh, it's not just income that's being taxed. It's like I went above and beyond. Now I'm just paying off debt. So like all that money that's coming in is really going to service that. But then you kind of get to that Warren Buffett thing of like, you figure out who's wearing shorts when the tide goes out, right? And like, you definitely don't want to be in a bad situation where you got a ton of debt. And then all of a sudden, like a tariff comes and 50% of your business is shut down and you're still liable for this debt at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know, because like I was lucky to grow up in a family business, and like we would have these conversations, but I'm 37 years old and I'm still learning things about it, and I'd like to believe I take a fairly proactive approach to it, because just being an American and a Canadian comes with its own set of challenges, I guess, from a tax obligation perspective, right? The U.S. as a U.S. citizen, you're obligated to keep your taxes in order. As a Canadian resident, that's where you do like, so living in Canada, having a business here, there's only so many people who understand that relationship, right? So it's like, I'm not like a rich millionaire that's like, okay, like I got a lot of money.
yet.
I'm still a scrappy entrepreneur trying to build and make an impact, where it's like, okay, like to figure that piece of it out, I got to go hire like a $700 an hour like accountant. Like, get out of here. Like, how do I acquire this information and like learn how to file a streamlined U.S. tax thing through ChatGPT, right? That's what I'm hoping for, because it's just so hard to do any of it, right?
It is. But I think, as like you were touching on, being growing up in an entrepreneurial household, my parents had a business too eventually, and I was at 14 to 20 probably, I was the company's, let's say, chief legal officer, chief marketing. My mom would come to me with, these are our Valentine's Day specials, I need you to make a one pager, and at the time, imagine making like what we now do in Canva, in Microsoft Word. Yeah. And trying to paste in pictures, or my parents would have
very one-dimensional, like center focused. Like
it was challenging, and my parents, I don't know, they're like, you grew up here, you should know how to do this. I'm like, I don't know how to do any of this. But you kind of tried to figure it out and do your best. But my parents, they had some rentals. When a tenant wouldn't move out, my dad would come to me with some chicken scratch on a napkin. Hey, the tenant moved out, and these are the deficiencies. So I would type up a letter, to the tenant, dear Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, here's the damages, here's your damage deposit, here's what we're giving you back.
That's amazing.
So all these little things that I look back now are just comical, but were so helpful. And I was always, I didn't love doing it, but I knew it, it helped them. But I learned all these lessons. But I think, to your point, like I think having grown up in these households, I feel like we have an obligation. Now, I'm also not a millionaire, but I think we have an obligation to teach people what we've learned.
Totally, which is
right. Like people aren't learning this stuff.
Which is,
and it might be basic, but it's
important.
Someone's got to teach them.
You got to like focus on the basics sometimes, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
A constant reminder of like, oh, okay,
right.
That's where we need to be, and I think that's the whole idea of this entire platform I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Obviously, when we first met, I was doing a golf podcast.
Yeah.
And after the whole ordeal around that kind of went down, like there was a hole in my heart of like, I miss having conversations with people and sharing them. Yeah. But obviously, I always wanted to take the golf conversation way beyond golf, and like that's this. It's like, okay, there's all these people in my life that I have all these crazy conversations with on a daily basis that I need to just start capturing that and letting other people listen in on it, because that's how we get people asking questions. They're like, oh, okay, like maybe I should reach out to Jacob and say, question, like we were talking about the grifters and Perry the penny pinching pig, right? Like, where do I go from this? And then they start that journey of like unraveling the ball of yarn to figure out where they're ultimately going to get, where they want to end up and how to get there, I guess. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're doing here, where it's like, like I like that you kind of bring a different perspective of entrepreneurship, banking, and like your family history versus the other week was talking to an artist from Romania, and like we were just deep into emotional talk, like, like how do you synthesize and like process emotion and then put that out there, because these are all pieces of life that are very important to me, I guess. And it's like, I see the value in all of it, right? Like there is value in understanding how your emotions impact you, right? And like guide your compass without necessarily letting the tail wag the dog, right? Because it's like, there are those indicators, and I love diving into it. The same way I'm like, okay, interesting. Like how does your mind work around finance and money? Because that's the root of most people's problems is money situations, right? Like obviously
a lot of people,
you can be happy however you are, depending on how you build your life. Where I'm a relatively simple person, where as long as I have a little bit of extra money to start buying shit to make podcasts and like have a reasonable car now that I drive, and like it's like I don't need that much more beyond that, which I think the future we might be heading towards is like, we've lived in this world where there's so much accessible to everyone that I think we're in for a little bit of a refocusing of priorities. Where it's like, you may not be able to have everything. But if you figure out what you want and you build a little bit of a plan, like you can have that, right? But it's like, maybe not Lamborghini and the big house and all the way down. It's like, okay, you love golf, get some nice golf clubs. You deserve that, right? Like you
Yeah.
work hard, figure that out, budget accordingly,
Yeah.
treat yourself. But
I get that. I think I get that. I agree with that, but I also would challenge that.
okay,
I think, given what we just talked about, I don't know. I view it differently, and I'm nowhere there. But I just think, I think we have an obligation. Like if you have those abilities, you have this platform, you have the skills you've learned. I'm not saying you have to be the next Warren Buffett or the next whatever Elon Musk, but I just think, politics aside, I just think like if you have those abilities, I mean, sure, do I want a G-Wagon? Yep. Mm-hmm. Do I want all these things? Yeah. And I'm not doing it because I want a G-Wagon. I want to do it.
Yeah.
I want to have more wealth so that I can create more opportunity for other people.
Totally.
Sure, I can buy nicer golf clubs. That benefits me, and that's great. But I think as a more of a global perspective, if I have that ability, I mean, and the thing is, not everyone's going to do it. But if I get to a level where I can, and I started, let's say this business eventually needs someone to do marketing, and then it needs somebody to do, it needs a CFO, and then it needs somebody to, do something else. I'm creating more jobs for people. I feel someone with opportunity,
Totally.
someone whose parents gave him that opportunity, and I'm not saying I'll get there, but I will try.
Totally.
You have an obligation, I think, to help other people, because other people don't have the same opportunity. So my goal is to make something of that opportunity. And if people say, well, yeah, you want to get wealthy. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But that comes with freedom. I don't want to get wealthy for the sake of having
Totally.
$20 billion in my bank account.
Yeah.
I want it so that I have freedom of choice and I give other people. Like imagine if you employed 1,000 people.
Totally. It'd be incredible.
If you stopped, let's say we never sold another treat again and I just sold them, I sold one bag a week for the rest of my life. Is that fine? Of course. Is it cooler if we employed 1,000 people and gave 1,000 people jobs that otherwise wouldn't have that job? And then you implement your own culture, all the things we're talking about.
And these people rise up and become a better version of themselves.
Right? That to me is, I think we have that obligation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree with you there for sure. I think that is what truly drives me in like that side of what I'm doing is I love, I guess I should back this up to like when I started a clothing company, I really feel that was the micro version of what I was trying to do of helping people understand themselves and at least present themselves and build confidence, right? It was like making Japanese raw denim, built a cool brand early, like internet era, built the website, did all the things and like did a pretty good job of it. Like I didn't truly appreciate what was happening at the time because I wanted to be a multimillionaire at 21 because there were people around me that were rich as shit at my age and you're like, oh, am I further behind? Like what's happening here that I didn't truly appreciate the thing I had built.
Right.
Obviously I ended up not really enjoying the fashion industry as like an industry, as like there's a lot of superficial shit that I'm not really into here.
Yeah.
But I took that and it was like, okay, now let's build the brand of a business, right? And like what really drove that was the idea that it's like, okay, if I can tap into like who you truly are and what makes you good and where your weaknesses are and what we're trying to do, and then you get people on board with that and you start teaching Joe about these platforms and tools that will make his life better. Is like ultimately, the end of that result is like you build a company that creates jobs and opportunities and gives people purpose and meaning in what they're doing there. And it's, it'd be nice to have money to buy whatever you wanted on that sense, just from like, right now it's more like, holy shit, like what's my energy bill gonna look like, right? Like rather than new golf clubs.
For sure.
But it's not the money to just have it and be a hoarder yourself. It's more like the vehicle to like, okay, like I can do more of this. I can go out there, I can invest in Tilly's because I now have 20 grand a year that I can invest into like a couple different businesses that, like that's where I'd really like to get because then by the end of life, who knows what you've all built and what impact, obviously. Trying to have a good impact.
Yeah,
I think sometimes what I've realized as I've gotten older is like sometimes trying to do the right thing is the wrong thing. Sometimes, like
Yeah.
for others, I don't know
Yeah.
why it's this episode of Jerry Seinfeld where like there's this Pakistani restaurant guy
Yeah.
that opens the thing, and then
Right.
Jerry's like, I'm gonna be a good guy and like go help this dude, and by
Yeah.
the end of the episode he's like, you're a piece of shit, Jerry, like you ruined my business, like
Yeah.
I tried to help you. So
Yeah.
that's where it's what's important to you. Like I'm gonna really try and get into your position, and
Right.
relativity I think is one of the craziest things that
Yeah.
like we haven't fully appreciated as like a society at large. Like scientists and people like they do, but like you can live in your own reality, and even though we live on Earth together and like physics and all these things are similar, it's like depending on your beliefs, like if you're like if I step on this crack, my mother's back will break, right? And like you, whether it's right or wrong, you hold this belief so strongly that you avoid every crack, right? That changes your fundamental outlook on life, right? And it's like how you navigate it. So what I've learned to try and do is like, okay, like what's going on in you? And like, I'm going to try and help add in these pieces to the puzzle while not like necessarily trying to influence the vision too much away from what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky balancing act for sure. Cause like, I feel like I have an inherent gift to see people's potential.
Yeah.
Cause I'm just like, oh, like that's strength, your weakness, this, that, your passions. Like, okay, I see where this can go. Right. And it's a balance of like pushing people towards that versus also letting them grow at their own pace. Right?
Yeah.
Cody, my friend, business partner.
Yeah.
It's been about a decade in the making of him like being into photography and like getting a computer and like he moves slower but deeper, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like with a camera and photography, it's like he's not like picking up everything all at once and moving forward, but it's like he spent the better part of 6 years like really trying to like find a style and how he looks at the camera and like getting his blacks and his whites, right? You know, like, so it's interesting to see that where I'm like, me personally, I'm kind of like,
he's moving a foot deep and maybe you're moving a foot wide.
Which is interesting to recognize that in people and not be like, I'm going to try to make you like me. I'm going to let you build your own strength because I'm not the omnipotent one here that can see and like, I can't feel everything and there's a lot of nuance, but like I'm going to help you try and extract that and make sense of it for you because that's the important part, right?
Yeah, and I think like focusing on things, like just focusing on value, whether it's our business, like it's great that I want to achieve all these things, but if we don't focus on value first, if you think about I'm going to start this brand and I'm going to make $1 million, you're going to make
$0.
Right? Let's focus on
probably a negative, actually.
Yeah, you're going to lose money. Focus on a quality product, delivering value. And if that ends up being true, then the rest will come.
Yeah.
And it's no different. You're talking to, for me, I run a commercial team at a bank, focus on delivering value to them so that they can deliver value to our clients. And then for that, our clients will pay. But if we're not delivering differentiated advice, that value piece, we're just a commodity.
Exactly.
And it's no different here, right? So
in every aspect, otherwise you're probably scamming people.
That's right.
Some grifting, if you will.
That's right.
I see that word floating around a lot these days.
I have lately too.
Every time I see it, I'm like, Jakub's book.
Yeah.
No, you're totally right there. I like this conversation. We're inching towards the end of it, I guess. Like, do we have any final thoughts that you feel you'd like to share with the world? Obviously, you're welcome back to the podcast, but
with the world. Good question.
Like, greetings, world.
That's pretty vague.
It's a global podcast all of a sudden.
That's pretty vague. I don't know, man. I just think we're in a weird time right now. I mean, people oftentimes, and I've done this in the past too, but it's interesting getting this perspective is change of government, there's turmoil in the world, there's relationships, there's stuff going on at work, there's always something. I think sometimes and I just told this to a young student the other day, he was asking me for some advice, and I just said, if you can, like, steer clear of the drama and the shit. There's always something going on. Every day you can wake up and find a problem that'll derail your day. Just steer clear of the shit, the drama, do your work, do the best you can, take ownership, And I think in the long run, you'll succeed, and you'll succeed beyond others. Because there's so much distraction. I think if you can convince yourself to go to work on the days that no one wants to go to work, you know, an entrepreneur I follow, Andy Frisella, talks about like it's like the weekend is where you get ahead.
Totally.
Weekend and the evenings.
Yeah.
When everyone's watching God knows what on TV, and I do it too. But when people are doing that, that's kind of when you get ahead, and it's hard to do some days. You wake up, you don't feel good.
Totally.
But I guess the gist is there's something every day.
Yeah.
You know.
Which, yeah, it's interesting you say that because like, as I've evolved in my life, like my work schedule is nutty, like in the sense that like I'll work till 4 o'clock in the morning because like I have total silence, and like that's my time to like I don't have to worry about a phone call derailing my day for an hour or whatever. It's like, okay, I'm up till 4 in the morning just sitting at this table or my desk over there just like cooking things. And just like how I've had to reshape my model of like productivity, and it's kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, what's the one thing that is going to move things forward today? Like as long as every day, it doesn't matter. It can be an 8-hour thing one day. It can be a 45-minute thing another day. But let's always try to do one thing a day that pushes the vision forward, right? Yeah. And Saturday and Sunday I like to do family stuff. But like one thing this podcast is going to really get me to do is I got to quit saying and like. I hate it, but it is what it is at this stage. But that's why it
takes time.
Back on the program of podcasting, because it makes you way more conscious. And I think I fell into a hole there of just horrible grammar. But what about when the shit shows up on your door? What's your process of handling it then?
Good question.
Like there's avoiding it, and then there's like...
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Like, what is the shit that shows up? Give me an example.
I don't have an example offhand. That's tough to...
I mean, let's say, I'll give you a work example.
Okay.
You know, the day's going great, and then a team member reaches out. Oh my God, this client, this is going on. I mean, I think it's just, like a lot of it comes down to starting with communication, clarity. I mean, asking the right questions, right? I think it's two-part. I think it's asking the right questions, figuring out what's truly going on. And I've learned this I've been leading a team for about 16, 17 months. And I learn a ton from them. They learn something hopefully from me, but oftentimes they come to me with a situation. And I've learned this because I then have to explain it sometimes to my leader. And I've had the embarrassing thing happen where I've gone to my leader and said, hey, this is going on. And they ask a few questions and I don't know the answer. And I'm like, shit. So when I go back to the team member, it's starting with the questions. Okay, what's going on? And understanding the nuance, understanding the marketplace, the situation, and what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it. And then I think sometimes it depends on the situation, but I think the severity, the nuance, but is moving quicker. Oftentimes I think I see myself, family, friends, whatever, colleagues, we move so quick, so slowly.
We let it just weigh on us.
Well, we get a decision and it's a $5 decision, but we spend 3 hours.
Totally.
Or the inverse, sometimes here's a $10,000 decision. We got to do this and this. And it's like, well, hang on, let's find out the nuance.
Totally.
Right? So I think it's just, you got to assess the situation appropriately. I think that's...
I like that.
You know, because sometimes it's easy to make a decision with, you know, not enough information.
And too much emotion.
Right. Sometimes you're not going to have all the information.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect, but it's about understanding the landscape. Here's the information you have. This is as good as it's going to get. Let's make a decision.
Yeah.
But I think it's getting there first.
Getting that information, which is interesting. It reminds me, this part of our conversation is that book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
Where it's like, there's
Daniel, I forget his name.
Kahneman or something, maybe.
Yeah.
You got to know when this is just a quick decision, like lunch today, like shouldn't be an hour, 2 hour long decision, right? Like it's low frequency vibration, even though what you've put in you is important, right? Versus buying a second property as a rental property, right? Like that's maybe something you don't just do on a whim. But ultimately, when I ask you the question of what do you do when the shit shows up on your door, I think the answer I was looking for, like I already had my own answer, just like, yeah, knowing when to like just put your gloves on and lean into it.
It's
right?
like that old from that old saying, knowing when to hold them or knowing when to fold them. It's like you gotta. Part of that comes with experience, but it's part of that is understanding the situation too.
And just being willing to lean into it. Whether leaning into it is like asking questions, collecting information, and taking a break to process it, but not being afraid to go in there and ask those questions, get the information, like make progress. Right now we're in the middle of like trying to buy another business, right? Yeah. And there's like a lot of conversations that absolutely have to happen, and people are afraid of like hurting people's feelings by saying something of like, how much do you want for this business, right? And then their expectation versus reality when it's like, no, we got to run towards that fire, right? And like let people know that, okay, this is going to be a tough conversation, and like we're not here to try and rip anyone off. We're here to like reach that point where we're all happy with it, or at least like we're mostly happy with a few minor concessions on both sides, where like you might want a little more money, but I'm going to ask you to let me pay it off over a little more time, right?
Yeah.
Where I think sometimes people are afraid to just like get into the shit a little bit and then roll up their sleeves and say, you know what, like let's just do this. Instead, they just keep that monster in the closet. When it's like sometimes you just open the door, see what monster you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think you have to, sometimes you just have to ask. And not sometimes. I think that's the answer.
Most of the time.
I mean, I remember talking to a client a couple years ago that's infinitely more successful, and I asked him for some advice. And I don't know what I was expecting, this like elaborate, here's the mythical success, the secret to success, you're going to become the genie. Yeah, I'm rubbing the genie. Yeah. And he's just like, if you want something, just ask. And I'm like, that's it.
So simple, man.
And it's kind of comical. Like, try it out. I mean, I encourage people listening, try it out. Worst thing they say is no.
Totally.
It's if you want something, it's like, listen, and it doesn't have to be outrageous, but it's just like, listen, ask this question, and they'll go, they might say no, but they may say, hey, what about this? And it shocked me how simple it was and how often I didn't employ that.
Totally. I probably don't employ that.
Almost never. And you kind of start, and sometimes it takes retraining, I think, your mind a little bit. Whether you're at the store or you're doing whatever, or you're buying a business. Yeah. Just ask.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, if you're buying a $30,000 car, asking for a $10,000 concession probably is unreasonable.
Right.
But in terms of just day to day, like, try it out. Ask a simple thing at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at getting a sandwich, you're negotiating with the bank. You never know. And I think it's so simple, and even if it pays off 2 out of 10 times. Yeah, I think it's like those atomic habits. Yeah. It's those little changes. It's not the huge changes that are going to happen. Like, it's just going to be little things.
Totally.
1% by 1% by 1%. So
I think that's a good place to end it.
Let's do it.
Everybody, try and ask for something reasonable, but don't be afraid. I'm gonna do the same. If it's like, hey, can you put a little extra meat on that burrito? Like, I might see if I could get it.
Great. That's a great example.
Like, just simple, but like, hey.
I bet you half the time they do it.
That's it. Ask for things. You're
right.
Cool. And we'll see you next time. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me.
More things we need to discuss, and hopefully the people enjoyed it. But that was a quick hour.
Anytime.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks.